Hi, and welcome to First Bite, a Nation's Restaurant News podcast. I'm your host, Holly Petrie. Today is Wednesday, November 9th, and here are your top stories. First, restaurants start to see a recovery in urban markets. Several brands from Shake Shack to Tim Hortons to Potbelly noted strong sales and traffic recoveries in their urban locations during Q3 earnings calls. Second, Panera Bread is opening its first digital and to-go stores in New York City. The new New York City store is one of two smaller store formats designed for urban neighborhoods that Panera will be rolling out. Third, parent to emerging restaurant Crisp & Green names Kelly C. Baltz CEO. Steel Brand's founder and current CEO Steel Smiley to step down to an advisory role and serve as chairman of the board. Fourth, Noodles & Company gained some momentum from lower chicken costs. The company is coming out of Q3 with accelerated sales and improved traffic trends. And finally, how First Watch's traffic thrives while the rest of the restaurant industry struggles. First Watch's same-store sales and traffic growth were both positive for the third quarter as the breakfast brand's success continues to soar. Now let's dive deeper into one of these stories. Urban markets have long been an important lifeline for restaurants because they generate a consistent traffic flow, particularly during the critical lunch and dinner dayparts. Further, they tend to complement other urban businesses, creating a compelling destination for economic activity. Of course, that activity went away in 2020 and then stalled again in 2021 with the Delta and Omicron variants. But now a comeback seems to be underway, and restaurants with a strong urban presence are experiencing some momentum accordingly. Consider Shake Shack, for instance, which calls New York City its hometown. The city's office occupancy rates increased by more than 10% in September, the highest point since the pandemic began, and that trend has played a major role in the chain's continued recovery. Let's hear more about this urban revitalization from Alicia Kelso.
I think revitalization is a super strong word, but I want it to be revitalization, so I'm sticking with it. Because 2.5-3 years ago, it was hardcore. It was sad because when you think about restaurants in urban centers, there's a whole ecosystem around that. There's offices. There's shopping, and there's the tourism industry. Everything, it's much more of an ecosystem than drive-throughs on their own, on a suburban street. So, when that went away in 2020 and then, sort of went through fits and starts through Omicron and Delta, I think that this latest round of earnings calls was sort of a cause to be cautiously optimistic about some kind of movement back toward mobility. And I think, we heard that explicitly on Shake Shack's call, where, the executives actually sounded surprised about the mobility, because, they're urban based, that's their core. They're New York City based. And they mentioned that the momentum in particular coming out of Labor Day was significant in New York and other urban centers. And so revitalization, again, I think is a strong word, but I think momentum is a very accurate word. There's momentum here. And, we're seeing foot traffic return to offices. I think New York City is back at its occupancy at the highest level since pre-pandemic. They're not 100%. I don't think anybody believes we're ever going to go back to 100% at the office. So, the new normal is what it is, but the fact that there is momentum and mobility back in urban centers, I think is exciting for brands that have strong urban cores. I also think it is a reason for other brands who were maybe considering a more aggressive urban development pre-pandemic, who paused that development in the throes of the pandemic in 2020. I think that is cause for them to go ahead and open up that pipeline again. And we're seeing that, especially with Starbucks, Panera, announced just this morning that they're sort of leaning heavy into some of their digital, to-go models focused on urban centers. I know KFC last year announced that they were going to push harder in urban centers. So I think the story here is that it was almost written off, that development pipeline in urban centers in 2020, and we're now seeing that's not the case. There's a comeback happening, and that's exciting because we want that ecosystem to come back as well. That's economic activity for all of these markets.
Which is interesting because when you think of a big city, you don't typically think of chain restaurants.
Right. But and that I think supports another point here that is exciting. I don't think we're just talking about chain restaurants. I just think we're getting the color from chain restaurants because of their earnings calls. But independents are they're gonna start thriving a little bit again, especially as tourism comes back. And we see tourism coming back. We've listened in on Southwest and Delta earnings calls within the past couple of weeks, and they are hitting highs. They are telling us that people are traveling and out and about again. And that all comes back to them, the pent-up demand that we all have to get out of our houses. It still exists. It's still very strong. Pandemic fears, whether justified or not, are going away, unlike last year, where they were still kind of hovering a little bit because of Omicron and Delta. So I feel like this is a new era, the new normal, like I said, but there's so much pent up demand, for travel. And with that comes, the smaller and independent type concepts, reaping the benefits of that. And again, just sort of another anecdote about that. If you listen to Papa John's earnings calls, the executives flat out said that they took a little bit of a hit in Q3 because people were not at home anymore. They weren't ordering pizza. And so all of this bodes well for, urban momentum. I'll avoid revitalization for now. But all this bodes well for urban momentum. And I think because of that, we're going to start to see probably a little bit more cautious optimism with that development pipeline in those markets. I will also say, if I may, this isn't just about mobility. If you think about urban pipelines for restaurant concepts, those are smaller, largely digital facilitated, largely to go only. And those units fit well into an urban center more than they would, in a suburban center. So with the pandemic accelerating digital habits and digital trends, brands are wise to lean into that. And the best place for them to do so are in these urban centers. So there are sort of two factors at play here. And I think that's going to continue to be the case, both as mobility returns to near normal levels and as consumers continue to demand those on-the-go, digital-enabled, access to restaurants.
So a little bit of what we talked about yesterday with kiosks.
Absolutely, no doubt. There's tons of things at play here, and they all go together. I mean, the ecosystem, if you will. But yeah, I think it's important to note that just because, and Sweetgreen's earnings are this afternoon. That'll be interesting to hear too, because they're urban based. But listening to Shake Shack executives get excited about the return to mobility because they're mostly urban centered, that does not mean they're abandoning their suburban strategy. In fact, I don't want this to come across as that at all, because that's not the case. In fact, what's interesting now is that these brands are smarter. They are able to, trigger pricing dynamics based on market, promotional dynamics based on market. As we talked about yesterday, Holly, that they're going to send you different promotions than they send me, New York City versus Louisville. And so I think operators are just getting smarter and are wiser to have more of a mix with their strategy. Whereas before, they probably put more apples into one basket, and then in 2020 shifted those apples to the suburban basket because we didn't know when urban was going to make a comeback. And I think now they're kind of back at a balance.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of First Bite. We'll be back tomorrow with another one. Until then, stay up to date with all your news on nrn.com.